Hello and welcome to you. I'm your host, Kari Ilonummi. This is the NoSpinNewsSource.com monthly report for the month of August 2014. We have a lot to discuss today, from impeachment, which is going from fringe conspiracy theory to now mainstream news, that's right, and so much more. Jesse Ventura is in court in a lawsuit battle, and we have so much to discuss, from what would be Russia to what would be Speaker Boehner's lawsuit against what would be President Obama, and more. But for now, let's check out what would be this interview with Harry Dent, and we'll see you right back.
Joining us via video Skype is the best-selling author of The Great Crash Ahead, Harry S. Dent Jr., and he has an interesting bio. I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but he's the founder of H.S. Dent, an economic research firm specializing in demographic trends. His mission is helping people understand change using years of hands-on business experience. In the late 1980s, Dent developed a new way of understanding the economy and forecasting what lies ahead based on consumers, which he outlined in his book, The Great Boom Ahead, in late 92. In that book, he stood virtually alone in accurately forecasting the unanticipated boom of the 1990s, and even called for the next Great Depression to start in 2008. He sure did. Dent has offered several best-selling books, including The Great Depression Ahead in 2008, and he keeps his audience informed through his monthly newsletter, the H.S. Dent Forecast. In his latest 2011 book, The Great Crash Ahead, he outlines why government stimulus is doomed to failure and the economic havoc that lies ahead. And he joins us. He graduated from the University of South Carolina and earned his MBA from Harvard Business School, where he was a Baker Scholar. Okay, we're going to go to him now. Thank you for holding while I was ranting about what's happened with the storms. And FEMA is angry at the power companies. They say, get it back on or you're in trouble. But I mean, FEMA is totally incompetent. Look at what happened with Katrina. Do you have any comments on the current state of things before we get into your larger worldview of what's coming?
Well, I mean, there's cycles in everything. There's cycles in like solar activity and stuff, and that's tending to affect things on the grid now. So, I mean, anything you can study in cycles, and the most important thing is to understand what drives those cycles. When do they come and go? But more importantly, in the economy, we look at demographic trends, predictable things people do as they age, drive almost all the key cycles over time in our economy. So anybody can understand it, and economists really don't have a clue.
Tell us about yourself, because I've read one of your books. I've read the excerpts that you did indeed make, in some cases, decades before things did unfold. How were you able to look off into the future and basically develop your system of research and forecasting?
Well, first, Alex, I wasn't trained as an economist. I was a business consultant coming out of Harvard Business School, working with Bain & Company, consulting to Fortune 100 companies on strategic change. How are their markets and industries changing? Where do they need to go? And I did the same thing with new ventures on the more innovative side. So I've seen the economy from a real world point of view. And out of that experience, I developed some simple tools for predicting the macro economy, not just one industry or one consumer product, but what do people do in general as they age? How do they create inflation? How do they spend money? How do they raise their families? How do they invest money? When do they retire? All these things. And when you look at that, especially with new generations, and especially a generation the size of the baby boom, which is unprecedented in size as a generation, the baby boom has driven a boom from 1983 to 2007. It's just a 46-year lag on the birth index for the peak in spending. It's that simple. And now they're going to be spending less, paying down borrowing, and buying less houses. So the government stimulus doesn't have a chance of working, and they're only racking up more debt after the greatest debt bubble in history.
But I look at the United Nations and Goldman Sachs and others. They talk about a post-industrial nation and how they want to have less population, but they know full well that a boom in population actually, generally in history, creates a boom in the economy over time. Now the baby boomers are getting ready to retire. So right on time, the banksters are making sure that everything implodes. So whatever's paid back is paid back in inflated dollars. What do you expect to see in the future? You've accurately predicted these trends. What's happening in Europe? What's happening here? A lot of metrics say we're already in a depression. They claim we were out of a recession 3 years ago and that pigs fly. What do you see coming in the future?
Well, first of all, Japan proves this point that slowing population and aging is not good for the economy. You need young people to innovate when they're young, enter the workforce, raise families, work hard, earn money, and they're the ones that support the older people anyway. Japan baby boom peaked just before and right after World War II, a decade or more ahead of Europe and the United States, and guess what? Their economy started to tank. They had their real estate bubble, their stock bubble, everything we've seen a decade or so ahead of us, and now we're going into the same thing. So Japan proved if you don't have more young people, if people don't have kids and raise kids, or if you don't encourage qualified immigrants, it's hard to continue to grow because older people slow down and young people rev up. So Japan is already in a long-term downturn. All the stimulus in the world has not turned around their economy. It's eased the pain, but it has not turned around the economy. Europe is now the next. Southern Europe is the next fastest aging, and then East Europe and Russia, and then the U.S., and ultimately even China is going to age faster than the U.S. coming ahead, and the world ahead is going to boom largely in the emerging countries from Southeast Asia and India around the world. But all developed countries, as we've gotten richer and more urban, we have less kids, and then kids on a 46-year lag tell you where the economy's going, and most economies are going sideways at best in America and down in places like Southern Europe and Japan.
And here in the United States, there are really, I guess, three different types of people. There are folks that are willing to work 3 or 4 jobs to live a middle-class life, or to try to survive and not go on welfare. There are kind of the nouveau riche types that want to sit around lazy and don't want to work. And then I guess you've got kind of the whole bureaucratic class. And I guess you got the welfare class too. I mean, there's more than 3 groups. The point is, there's less and less people that are willing to work, and the government and the bureaucrats and the welfare people look at us with hate. They talk bad about us all day. They say we're trash, we're filth. There's never enough money we can pay them. So what's going to happen is it all collapses, and there's not enough of us to pay for armored vehicles on every corner or drones to watch us because the government wants to keep their milk cows behaving.
Well, basically, it takes crisis for people to get reality, and we're not there yet. We started in 2008, but the government bailed us out of all of that and stimulated out. We've had debt growing almost 3 times the rate of our economy since the early 1980s. We've had constant government deficits since the early 1970s, constant trade deficits. We and most other countries in Europe, especially Southern Europe, have been living off of debt, not just our own natural work habits and increase in productivity and GDP. We've been living off debt. So this downturn will bring reality, and people start to realize that the entitlement systems we have are not even remotely affordable decades in the future. Young people have no chance of getting the benefits that older people have gotten, and even older people will get less. Our support systems for people who don't work are going to have to come into some question. I mean, you need some safety net, but not an endless safety net. So I think you're getting a big reality crisis in the next several years.
All right, folks. 2 years ago, I stated that the United States government was in bed. That's right. The CIA was in bed with what would be Al-Qaeda and terrorists overseas and folks here, such as our president, Barack Obama, members of Congress, Senate, folks such as Dianne Feinstein, Harry Reid, our Congress member here, Rick Larson of Washington State, the 2nd District, have supported and capitulated with your hard-earned tax money, supported Al-Qaeda and played both sides of the field, which would be funding the troops in these wars and funding the opposing sides that kill our troops or go against our wars. Well, that was pretty off the wall and over the top fringe for many people. Well, now we have the proof as what would be one of the head senior members of Al-Qaeda, that's right, has went public and whatnot, and discussing this issue with what would be a news station. His name is Nabil Naim, the founder of the Islamic Democratic Jihad Party and former top Al-Qaeda commander, told the Beirut-based pan-Arab TV station Al Madin, all current Al-Qaeda affiliates, including ISIS, work for the CIA. That's right. He states, quote, "What I want to tell you, the efforts of all Islamic countries, Sunni and Shiites, must combine to eradicate these groups because these groups are the claws of colonialism in the region," Naeem said. Naeem said ISIS, now IS, or the Islamic State, is part of the neocon and Israeli clean break plan to balkanize the Arab and Muslim Middle East. So that's right. We are funding both sides of terrorism, and this is a very, very bad thing. There's more to come on this throughout time. I'm not going to focus on it right now, even though this is a huge breaking story and whatnot as well that just came out. Now, Congressman stated, yes, Obama is using the Cloward-Piven strategy, according to WorldNet Daily Reports. Quote, "I do feel this is an attempt to flood the border with illegals, is an attempt to play out the Cloward-Piven theory," said Representative Steve King, representative of Iowa. Quote, "If you do not see them bring reinforcements down there to seal the border, that means that yes, it's a Cloward-Piven maneuver to flood the country until we get to the point to where we are an open borders country that welcomes everybody, legal and illegal," Representative Steve Stockman, representative of Texas, stated, and goes on to state he agreed that Obama, who studied the chaos strategy at Columbia, according to a classmate, quote, "is trying to do a Cloward-Piven thing to the border," unquote. Obama follows the far left Leninist socialist type stuff, Stockman told WorldNet Daily. Now, Sarah Palin has joined what would be the impeach Obama crowd. Now, this is interesting because now we're getting folks from what would be the mainstream joining folks such as myself, Lyndon LaRouche, and others who were ahead of the trends and stated years ago that this freak of nature, due to breaking the law in many ways and going against what is our nation and what we are about, nationally speaking, constitutionally, that this freak of nature, Barack Obama, needed to be impeached in order to protect our economy and our future and to begin to rebuild and to bounce back from the fall and the pieces that have fallen apart. Well, here we are at a point now when we have folks and actors such as even Steven Seagal discussing and hinting toward what would be the fact that this president needs to be impeached. So now it's not just Kari Ilonummi, now it's Steven Seagal saying that this president needs to be impeached. So why don't you hear Steven Seagal speak, and we'll be right back.
This next gentleman, when it was kicked, the idea was kicked around that he might run for governor. On our show, I just told him a few minutes ago, I'm a big fan, and there's so many of his films that have had the 3-word name, Hard to Kill, Out for Justice. So I said, if you're going to run for governor, you got to have a 3-word campaign slogan: In to win, ballots of blood. Ladies and gentlemen, Steven Seagal.
Well, believe it or not, I had no idea that I was going to be speaking tonight, so I really am not going to fit into the characteristic funny. Everybody's funny tonight. What I have to say is quite serious, and what I really want to say is never in my life did I ever believe that our country would be taken over by people like the people who are running it at this day. And I think that when we have a leadership that thinks that the Constitution of the United States of America is a joke, when we have a president who has almost 1,000 executive orders now, when we have a Department of Justice that thinks that any kind of a judicial system that they make up as they're going along can get by with whatever they decide that they want to do. Like Ted Nugent said, the Fast and the Furious. what's happened with the Fast and the Furious? What's happened with the truth about any of some of the greatest scandals in American history that have happened right before our eyes? If the truth about Benghazi were to come out now, I don't think that this man would make it through his term. I think he would be impeached. Yeah, America's a great country. It really is a great country because it's a country where we have designed a system based on the Constitution where we have freedom of speech. We're allowed to disagree and say what we want to say and should not be persecuted for it. But on the same token, those who have something to say that is too controversial really have to be very, very careful. I think right now we're at that sort of tipping point where whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, we have to realize that we have to put the parties aside and all to come together as Americans and realize we have to take this country back. Thank you.
And welcome back to the show. Now, discussing more about what would be this impeachment issue, the House Rules hearing on Boehner's lawsuit will put key impeachment issues onto the table. House Rules Committee will be holding did hold at this point, a hearing and a vote on whether to authorize Speaker of the House John Boehner to proceed ahead with the lawsuit against President Obama for his violation of the constitutional separation of powers and his executive actions, rewriting the Affordable Care Act. Now this will go into other issues and variables as well, not just with that, but signing statements and other variables which will be interesting and can very well lead to the impeachment of Obama. Even though it's just starting out with a fact-finding hearing and a lawsuit, this could be the beginning of a long, dark road for the president and anybody who's too close to him or have protected and tried to make him look good over the years. And this is a very interesting point in the road for myself. For instance, there are folks in the past that didn't like me because of my views or I was harsh on Obama, but now everyone is discovering that I've been right about Obama. So this is a very interesting point in the road where we're seeing people beginning to distance themselves from the losing crowd and beginning to come a little closer to the perceived new winners and the upcoming candidates for the near future. It's kind of funny how opportunistic people can be, not just politicians. So Ambassadors Crocker, Pickering, Blue Hours, and ISIS states that not Assad is the biggest threat to the U.S. and Iran must work together to help put out what would be this the ISIS situation. It's ISIS, not Assad, that is the biggest threat. So, and that's a very interesting factor and whatnot. During a brief, well, we'll go into this here. The TSA is allowing illegals to fly without verifiable ID, says Border Patrol Union, McAllen, Texas. Illegal aliens are being allowed to fly on commercial airlines without valid identification, according to the National Border Patrol Council, NBPC. Quote, the aliens are getting released on their own recognizance, are being allowed to board and travel commercial airliners by simply showing their notice to appear forms. According to local 2455 spokesman Hector Garza told Breitbart, Texas. Jesse Ventura is in court, as I mentioned earlier, due to claims made by America's deadliest sniper, stating that he allegedly knocked Jesse out in a barroom brawl, which, according to Jesse, never happened. 81 killed, hundreds wounded as Israel preps a Gaza invasion. Speaker Boehner, as mentioned earlier, is not just, what would be suing the president, but when presented with the issue of impeachment, he stated that he was against that. So it shows that many of these people are in bed together, but many Republicans are beginning to break from the Speaker and from the Republican Party and begin to say enough is enough. It's also an election year too. Kind of interesting. Hillary Clinton's new book is being beat in sales by its rival book, which is meant to make her book look bad. The New York Times bestseller. Kind of funny. Now, Senator Rand Paul, Kentucky, argued that the U.S. has made ISIS stronger by being, quote, allied with them in Syria, unquote, in an interview on the Sean Hannity show. As I mentioned earlier, we've been funding Al-Qaeda. Members of Al-Qaeda are now coming out and saying it. Senators are now saying it. I said it first. I said it over 2 years ago. Conspiracy theory is now becoming fact and mainstream news. We break it here, and you discover it somewhere out there. So, exclusive ad promises $6,000 a month tax-free to house immigrant children. Congressman Jim Brindestein denied access to military facility housing 1,200 immigrant children, told to make an appointment. Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl could see tax-free $350,000 dropped into his bank account if the current investigation into his disappearance from his base in Afghanistan was not desertion, they discover. And if he's deemed to have been a prisoner of war for the 5 years he was held by Islamic militants, Sergeant Bergdahl to return to active duty as well. So remember, Sergeant Bergdahl gets taken. 5 years he spends with the Taliban. The president does a swap in which former Secretary of the State Hillary Clinton said would never happen without congressional approval. She said nobody will be released from Guantanamo, no prisoner exchanges, unless there is explicitly congressional approval. That's what she stated during her tenure as Secretary of State under this President, Barack Hussein Obama. What happened? Well, a flip, a flop, and once again, the exact opposite. Congress was never notified. They were told after this deal, after it was already done. Sergeant Bergdahl gets released for an exchange for 5 major key players of the Taliban. We are told then, media can't see Bergdahl. He's in a mental state in which we have to be fragile and go step by step with his condition. Now all of a sudden, he's back to active duty. Wow. He must be a fast healer. So, very interesting. There's also a possibility Sergeant Bergdahl may be a deserter. There's also a possibility he was very deep undercover and he didn't desert at all. And this is part of a plan and something that's being used right now, just the same time that the VA scandal is going up and being a big issue, that this is a diversion being related to military and the veterans, but a diversion of the bigger issue with the veterans, which is this Sergeant Bergdahl deal. So instead of the VA scandal and situation, which brings us all together over one situation, which is how our troops are being treated, this Bergdahl situation is a nice dividing thing. It helps divide us. It helps take that big group that come together of the VA situation and divide it. Do you think there's a conspiracy? Do you think it's not? Is Bergdahl good? Is Bergdahl bad? Is he a deserter? Is he just top secret undercover? It brings up all these little issues over Bergdahl. It's a side distraction, and at this point, unless there's something really worth talking about, I'm not talking about it after today. Now, right now, we need to talk about the establishment and the government. Dr. Stephen Pieczenik, a major player within the State Department, he has collaborated, worked with what would be some very high folks in the government and governments around the world to de-escalate situations, including hostage situations. He's a person in which Patriot Games with Harrison Ford was made after. He's a real character of the Patriot Games and individual, very top secret, trains at what would be I believe it's a Navy cadet school, if I'm not mistaken, on the East Coast. And we're at a point in the road when now the establishment's beginning to turn on each other and start tossing each other under the bus. So they're saying that this individual, which has always been considered as a hero and a top-notch guy, is now somebody who is being considered as a terrorist and being associated with something he didn't do for not doing it. In other words, for not helping with an Italian situation, he's now being blamed, I guess, for the murder of an Italian and whatnot in their government from the past. So very interesting, and allow him to discuss in his own words what is going on right now, and we'll catch you right back.
Dr. Pieczenik, what do you know?
Well, what I know is I'm going to give you a very special, unusual story that will show you the hypocrisy and inconsistency of this administration. 1 month ago, I was served a subpoena by the FBI on behalf of the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District of Florida by the name of Brian Fraser at the behest of the Justice Department, Eric Holder, and at the behest of Cecilia Altanaga, United States Supreme Court District Judge, requesting my presence at the potential indictment for having non-negotiated against terrorists 35 years ago as the U.S. military officer and Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. And I was brought in on charges of criminal charges for doing exactly the opposite and being consistent with our policy of no negotiation with a Red Brigade terrorist. And as a result, the Aldo Moro, the Prime Minister of Italy, died. 35 years later, the State Department and the Justice Department, under the orders of Obama, has ordered me to appear before the court just 1 week ago, May 27th, 2014, at 10 a.m., in front of Brian Fraser, in front of an Italian prosecutor, at the behest of the Italian prosecutor, with the overlying notion that I will be committed for criminal indictment if I don't reveal what I had done in saving Italy and refusing to negotiate with terrorists. So what this shows, and what this just happened to me, and you're the only one to know now, the case number is here, it's 14MC21380 Altanaga. The judge was Altanaga, the Attorney General was Brian Fraser, and I was brought up on charges that I potentially have killed a Prime Minister because I refused to negotiate in a time of war with Aldo Moro, with his Red Brigade. I was a U.S. military officer in combat, and I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary under Jimmy Carter, and for the very opposite reasons that this president, who's been a total hypocrite and a total incompetent, along with Eric Holder and the U.S. military, they have negotiated with a terrorist, allowed a deserter, this is a deserter, this is not an infiltrator, to leave his post. He should have been jailed, stockaded, and incarcerated, and he is not a prisoner of war. He is a deserter. He should have been tried. I, in turn, have been tried for saving my country, saving Italy, and I've had to pay $20,000 to a lawyer just to show up to explain why I did.
By the way, Dr. Pieczenik, I've got to interrupt you, and we'll go to our guest at 33 after. This is too important. But for people that don't know, Dr. Pieczenik will never talk about this on air, but I've gone and checked into him over the years. It's in the London Independent, the BBC, and Le Figaro in France, and the biggest papers in Italy, where they say Dr. Steve Pieczenik killed the Prime Minister by manipulating the Red Brigade and not negotiating, and then they killed him, which is crazy because how is not negotiating killing him when they're the ones that killed him? So that's in the papers 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago. I mean, you can look up Dr. Steve Pieczenik, and that's pretty much what you get on him. Running those operations with the Army and others. And of course, he helped found Delta Force with General Boykin, who's also a listener of the show. And what I can't believe here is we get him on about this, and he drops this bombshell. You didn't tell us that, Dr. Pieczenik.
No.
Was it sealed? What happened in the court? Is it
because I couldn't say a word to you or anybody else, but since I appeared on May 27th in front of a prosecutor who was flown over from Italy, we had an interpreter. This is all American tax dollars. Plus, we had Brian Fraser sitting there. I had to hire a lawyer for $20,000.
But what I want to say, was this under a national security order? Because I don't want to violate one of
No,
those.
it's not under national security order. As a matter of fact, this is a totally illegal procedure because they brought in a former military officer in a civilian court, and they didn't even know I was a military officer at the time because I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for counterterrorism and management. And so what happened is the military, the CIA, our Justice Department, State Department completely abandoned me as a former officer of the military, and now they're saying that they never leave anybody behind. It's an absolute lie. General Dempsey should resign. Hagel should resign. The President of the United States should be impeached for violation of constitutional orders and the fact that he has committed crimes. This person that they exchanged prisoners for was a deserter. I was a principal hostage negotiator and created No negotiation, hostage.
By the way, you're on record as the head psychiatrist over the PSYOP and to be able to get the Camp David Accords as well.
Assistant Secretary of State, one of the first. I had just saved over 500 hostages in Hanafi Muslim. I was asked by Secretary of State Cyrus Vance at the behest of Jimmy Carter and at the behest of Warren Christopher to go over to Italy. It was Prime Minister Cossiga. He was the Interior Minister.
Let me ask you a question. Are they going after you now because what you're saying on this show?
No,
I know they're purging a lot of people.
And welcome back to the show after that quick video there. Genetically modified mosquitoes were released in Brazil, and they are causing dengue fever emergency despite being touted as a preventative tool, according to naturalnews.com. A genetically modified GM mosquito intended to eradicate dengue fever may have actually contributed to an epidemic of the disease in Brazil, organizations have warned. It is extraordinary that experiments with Oxytex GM mosquitoes continue, and commercial releases have been approved without any monitoring of the effect on dengue. Very interesting, Dr. Helen Wallace, director of GeneWatch UK, stated. Ron Paul states that the collapse of the economy is very close. That's right. I've been saying this as well. It is very close. And we're going to see not just bailouts, we're getting ready to see something called the bail-in mechanism. Remember that I've been discussing about for the last couple of years? The bail-in mechanism. That's right, which is where they're going to tap into personal 401ks, bank accounts, pensions, your money. They're going to tap into it and say you have to pay directly for those bailouts and the things of the past. That's right. It's coming off, the fat is coming off of your table. The pork is coming out of your fridge pretty soon, directly. Now, law professor Bruce Fine, which is someone who the Congress actually goes to advise them on constitutionality of certain laws and factors, has stated that he will openly support a impeachment proceeding against President Barack Obama. And this is somebody who studied with the best of the best, including Paul Wolfowitz and all the other technocratic, elite, globalist banker folks as such. But this guy here is not a part of them. He studied, he knows the stuff, but he never went the darker route of these people. So at this point, I'm going to show you a video right now of what would be law professor Bruce Fine discussing the constitutionality of Barack Obama's actions and what he thinks right now. Because it's one thing to have an individual as such to interpret the law, it's another thing to have an actual professor of law with such a prestigious background to tell you for himself. Now that's a weight, and that's a factor that cannot be so easily discredited. So why don't you check out this quick video from Alex Jones' interview, and we'll catch you right back.
Well, I won't go over his bio in the interest of time, but Professor Francis Anthony Boyle is a best-selling author. He helped write the Biological Weapons Convention. He served on the board of directors of Amnesty International, represented Bosnia and Herzegovina at the World Court. He served as a legal advisor to the Palestinian delegation to the Middle East peace negotiations from 91 to 93. In 2007, he delivered the Bertrand Russell Peace Lectures. Professor Boyle teaches international law, University of Illinois campaign, and the author of, and I'm not going to go over all the books he's written. You can just type in his name and find them. He has a PhD, magna cum laude from Harvard University, and more. And he basically took the somewhat secretive Harvard PhD that Kissinger and a few others have had, where they actually tell you how things really work. That's what Carol Quigley's book was about, was to have a manual so people could understand, wait a minute, we fund the terrorist, but then we fight the terrorist. And so he's a unique individual to break down the full spectrum of what we face. And for representing Muslims persecuted in this country, clearly have done nothing. He's been put on no-fly list, you name it. So he's been through a lot. He's been to the Middle East countless times. He can break down what he thinks is happening, but it's pretty obvious now. You've got Netanyahu openly endorsing ISIS a few weeks ago. You've got other countries endorsing it. You've got Saudi Arabia helping fund it. You've got NATO involved, British Special Forces, even the London Guardian reports, as we told you years ago, training some of them. I'm not saying they run them, but they're funding them and turning them loose. Then you've got Russia saying they may start striking Ukraine anytime because of shelling into their country. Over 1,000 dead in the last few days, according to the Ukrainians, bombing civilian areas, and the Ukrainians are bragging about it. You've got Soros behind that. All hell's breaking loose with the border being opened by design. That's now confirmed. The elite are bringing in global crisis. So I want to ask somebody who's been through the similar globalist training but turned against him early on, what he thinks the grand plan is. Is this order out of chaos, or do they just think it is? Or has megalomania set in like Hitler and Napoleon with these adventures? Who's running the show, and where does he think it's all going? If anybody can tell us, it's Francis Boyle. Thanks for coming on, sir. What do you think's going on?
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Alex, and my best to your audience. Yes, when you mention what's going on, I think we have to go back to my teacher, mentor, and friend, the late, great Hans Morgenthau, who founded international political science. And in fact, Kissinger revered Morgenthau. And when he taught international relations at Harvard, he used Morgenthau's casebook, Politics Among Nations. And what is going on now, and if you do a Google search under my name, you'll see an essay by me entitled Unlimited Imperialism, which Morgenthau was writing about a phenomena which for him described Alexander, the Romans, Hitler, Napoleon, and others of this nature, to distinguish it from ordinary imperialism. Namely, they want to control and dominate the entire world. And what I argued in my essay is taking Morgenthau's definition of unlimited imperialism. That is what we have seen the United States power elite, financial power elite, engage in since the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. They're going for broke, just like the Romans or Alexander, Napoleon, or Hitler, and they will continue to go all out. And the difference between Bush and Obama, it's Tweedledum versus Tweedledee. I've been through all these elite programs at Chicago and Harvard, and Obama's was behind me at Harvard Law School. Romney and I actually took all of our first-year law courses together at Harvard Law School. So there's no real difference here as far as the elite sees it. They're going for broke. And in the process, they realized to do this, they must establish a police state here at home. And you and I have been through this before. I believe I was in your documentary on this matter, so I'm not going to belabor it here. But, starting with the USA Patriot Act, the FISA Amendments Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, which, by the way, Senator Levin said when they first drafted it, it did not apply to United States citizens. And it was President Obama who insisted that it applied to United States citizens so that the military could basically pick up and disappear any citizen they want to here in the United States for whatever reason. Now we have the Obama drone campaign. I'm not here to justify President Bush Jr., but even President Bush Jr. did not arrogate to himself the right to murder United States citizens, which Obama and his Attorney General Holder have done, and have made it quite clear, Holder and Brennan, the head of the CIA, that they're fully prepared to do that here in the United States of America.
So there's an accelerated rotting. Let me ask you this before you go into the big picture and talk about what's happening in the Middle East currently and where you see their next step being. And Professor Francis Boyle joins us. What I'm getting at is, it seems like a classical power grab on every front, but whereas Caesar and Alexander actually went out and led their forces, they weren't even trying to so much degenerate their own culture just to dominate what was happening back in Rome, but that degeneracy came regardless. What I'm saying is the political elite run by Wall Street that make 40-to-1 bets with other people's money seems so dysfunctional and mentally ill. Looking at this as a student of history, I don't see their plan succeeding. I do see there being a chance of nuclear war and them destroying civilization. I mean, that's what I'm getting at. I mean, how dangerous are these people? What is your gut gestalt on where we are when the history books are written later?
Well, on both the domestic and the international point, on the domestic point, first, you're right about the financial elite in America. All of a sudden, the National Defense Authorization Act came out of nowhere. Why? They were terrified by the Occupy Wall Street movement taking off all over the country. And that's what produced NDAA. On the international arena, yes, of course, we could have a serious war at any time, as you pointed out in Ukraine, where Obama and his neocons and his neo-libs, there's not much difference, sponsored a neo-Nazi coup d'etat in Ukraine that overthrew a democratically elected government. We've now had firing across the undemarcated border between Ukraine and Russia. It appears they're trying to provoke Russia to invade Ukraine. And then the trap will have been sprung, and you'll have their puppet there, Poroshenko, invoke Article 51, the right of collective self-defense, and you'll have NATO forces streaming into Ukraine for sure. It's not exactly clear where they'll stop. You remember in the Clinton administration when they were bombing Serbia over Kosovo, General Wesley Clark ordered the NATO troops to take the Kosovo airport. And fortunately, the British military commander, Mike Jackson, refused because it was occupied by Russian troops and said that he's not prepared to start World War III. Well, who knows what will happen? The current policy towards Russia is being orchestrated by Zbigniew Brzezinski. I went through the same PhD program at Harvard that produced both Kissinger and Brzezinski before me. Brzezinski is an expatriate Pole who hates the Russians, and he wants to see them broken up into 1 million pieces. The top White House advisor at the National Security Council on Russia is a Brzezinski protege. Obama's mentor at Columbia was Brzezinski, and Brzezinski ran his entire foreign affairs campaign in 2008. So this is an extremely dangerous situation in Ukraine. Likewise in Syria and Iraq. At any time, Obama could start bombing in Iraq. And as you correctly pointed out in your introductory comments, ISIS was by us. It started with the Obama administration. Even Senator Rand Paul said this, and I'm a political independent, as you know, Alex. But even Senator Rand Paul said, well, yeah, we were arming ISIS, which is true. That's where the Benghazi operation was all about. Shipping Muslim fundamentalist weapons, equipment, and supplies into Syria. This war against Syria is Obama's idea. And he has armed, equipped, supplied, and trained every jihadi they can find, including those they used to overthrow Gaddafi.
Sure, let me ask you this then. Why is the ruling establishment doing things that they've never done so nakedly by an order of power? Or correct me if you think that's a wrong statement. I mean, they just seem to really have a crazed aura to them that just reeks of disaster. I mean, they just don't seem to care and have any sanity. And as you said, we came millimeters in Pristina, in Kosovo, from war with the Russians. We came millimeters in Georgia. And now it appears with Soros and the rest of them that even if the U.S. policy doesn't go with this, there's other NATO forces and Soros forces that are hell-bent on starting a war with Russia. How do they think they're going? Where do they want to go with this? I mean, I don't see it being successful.
Well, and also with China, Alex, Obama's pivot to Asia, taken right out of Brzezinski's grand chessboard. And you have these little bitty pieces of rock, the Diaoyu Islands right off of Taiwan, that Japan stole from China in the 1895 war of aggression against China when it was weak. And yet, after World War II, we refused to give it back to China. And now we, the United States, both Secretary of State Clinton and Secretary of Defense Hagel, have threatened to go to war so that Japan, the militarists in Japan, can hang on to these little pieces of rock right there in the...
And now the Chinese government, as you know, have told the audience in the last week in their official dailies, have said, okay, they're prepared for nuclear war with the U.S. They're going on maximum alert and build up. And then the same elite have heavily invested in China. I mean, I look at the globalists, this collection of neocons and liberal cons and all the rest of them, neo-libs. They really don't even have a formula at all. It's just screw everyone, screw over civilization, screw over classical egalitarianism. These people are the plague.
Well, you could read Machiavelli's The Prince or Thomas Hobbes' The Leviathan. The Prince for foreign affairs and Leviathan for constructing a totalitarian dictatorship. Because if you go through any of these elite programs, like at the University of Chicago,
They have you read them.
where the neocons come from, where I was schooled as an undergrad, and then Harvard, you have to know Machiavelli and Hobbes by your heart. And then add in there Nietzsche, and that pretty much accounts for it.
And by the way, that was my next point. And again, of course, these are philosophers that you know, that people like Hitler loved. For those that don't understand, Hillary, her favorite book's 1984 because she sees it as a beautiful world. And when you were bringing up Kissinger, like in the, you know, the individual exposing the, you know, total empire, they see it as a model. And so that's what you're getting at.
That's correct. And Clinton went to Yale Law School. I interviewed there for a job in 1977. They're no different from Harvard Law School. Bill Clinton went there too. So again, what you have here is elitist training grounds to produce these imperial managers. Whether Democrats or Republicans is pretty irrelevant. It's all the same. To rule the world. Only now, as I said, after September 11th, in the, I'm sure you've discussed the PNAC report, they're going for broke. They're literally going to try to take over Russia and China.
And welcome back to the show. Iraq claims that it has lost control over its chemical weapons over one of its depots. That's right, ISIS. These folks are now on the roll, working on taking over nation states, and they're taking stockpiles of cash, weaponry, and whatnot. They are amassing power and troops, and they have planned on coming to America, according to members of our Congress, and according to members of the actual Al-Qaeda ISIS connections themselves. They want to rain hell and havoc upon Europe and the United States as well. And we fund these folks. Now, EPA claims it has the power to garnish wages without court approval. 6 vials of smallpox discovered in laboratory near Washington. A Russian MP claims that the U.S. kidnapped his son from Maldives on a bogus cyber fraud charges and may be preparing to offer him as bait in a swap deal for Edward Snowden. Let's hope this isn't true. Let's see what happens and materializes over the next couple of months. But if this is true, that the United States kidnapped an actual son of a Russian government member, this is asking for trouble, and this is asking for World War III. You don't kidnap somebody's kid unless you're looking for results like this here. And this is just wrong. This isn't what we're supposed to do. If Russia is so bad, why are we kidnapping their children? So if this is true, so we'll see what happens over time and whatnot. A think tank connected to Zbigniew Brzezinski, speaking of him, as I mentioned earlier, folks such as him and Wolfowitz, Paul Wolfowitz and others, specifically here, though, a think tank that's connected to Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, is calling for retooling the U.S. military in preparation of a, quote, great power conflict, unquote, with a, quote, newly aggressive Russia and rapidly modernizing China, according to Homeland Security Newswire. That's right. These folks are preparing to set us into something I've been speaking of years about, a World War III scenario against Russia and China. Sanctions are heating up. As of this morning, more sanctions were placed upon Russia and certain companies, ranging from Kalashnikov to Ishmash, and what would be some of the state-ran oil and gas companies of the Russia Federation, and individuals that are associated with what would be the presidency. Marine Corps General John Kelly is commander of the U.S. Southern Command, or SOUTHCOM, charged with responsibility for the Caribbean Sea and all land south of Mexico. Says America's porous southern border and recent surge in illegal immigration is more than just a humanitarian crisis, claims a U.S. general in charge of the Central and South America. It's a threat to the United States' very existence. That's right. It's a threat to the United States' very existence. Now, Donald Trump is warning of, quote, financial ruin that's coming down the pipeline. Dick Cheney is coming out and actually stating now, not just that this president is wrong, but he has actually violated this constitutional oath of office and whatnot, and he has violated those factors and what would be the laws governing what a president can do. And this is Dick Cheney. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm not a right wing or this or that or whatever. I'm just an individual that reports the news and tries to stay as close to the facts as I possibly can. As I mentioned, it states on the front of the nospennewssource.com homepage. We're here to provide you with the most accurate and purest information available regarding politics, economics, and world events. Nothing more, nothing less. But even Dick Cheney is coming out and stating these things, and it's very interesting. I'm sure he's trying to save his own skin and make himself look good and toss this guy into the bus, a typical political game, but it still is a stepping stone and whatnot. We're discovering, as I mentioned earlier, the Al-Qaeda CIA connection, which has been exposed as well. Very, very interesting. At this point in the road, Bill Gates contraceptive microchip. That's right, there's a contraceptive microchip that has been created that will allow people to use their smartphone like an application as such to decide when they will be fertile and when they will not be. The question is, will this microchip do other things and control you or send other data to you or this or that? All those speculative variables, but let's check out what would be right now this documentation of this chip, and we'll see you right back.
News tonight, there's an idea that Bill Gates has conceived, an idea that he could remotely control contraceptives. This is from the MIT Technology Review. They say a contraceptive implant with remote control could be deactivated and reactivated using a wireless remote control. This would be implanted under the skin. It would dispense 30 micrograms a day of a hormone that's already used in a lot of different contraceptives, and they would put 16 years of that hormone in this device. What could possibly go wrong? Well, first of all, I don't know what the consequences would be if you got 16 years worth of contraceptive hormone all at once because there was a malfunction in the device, or it ruptured, or it was exploded in an accident. But then the question is, who's going to control this remote control contraceptive device? As we look at the Internet of Things, as we have appliances throughout our houses that are hooked into the Internet that can be hacked into, isn't it possible that this device could be hacked into as well? Of course it is. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how are we turning control over our lives, even over when we're going to have children, to outside parties, when we make it available for them to turn that on? Very dangerous that you would not know when it's being turned on or by who it's being turned on. Now, of course, there's also no surprise that this will be coming from Bill Gates with his connections back to Planned Parenthood. His father was president of Planned Parenthood for a very long time. The goal, they say, is to have this on the market by 2018.
And welcome back to the show. Now, as you notice, we try to provide you with video footage, folks such as Bruce Fine, which is a professor of law, on the last episode from last month, the 3-year anniversary mark of NoSpinNewsSource.com monthly report. We had key interviews from folks such as Susan Rice, former ambassador to the UN, along with what would be former head of the CIA, Mike Morrell. We have other folks today, Mr. Pieczenik, and others. The reason why I do this is to try to provide you with evidence, understanding of how and where I come up with some of this information, the conclusions I come to, and allow you to see this stuff be placed in order chronologically, step by step, so you can understand what I understand and you can see what I see. It's not about Republican, it's not about Democrat, it's not about independent. It's about being American. It's about coming together. It's about setting aside the differences and coming together for the bigger picture of humanity. That's what I'm about. That's what we are about, this website. We will continue to flourish. That's right. It's only 3 years. We'll be here for years to come. That's right. Long as no crazy laws come into play that curtail the freedoms of the First Amendment and the internet, NoSpinNewsSource.com is still in its infancy state and just beginning to build and take momentum now. And build momentum. Now, Texas Rep says that military bases are turning into, quote, refugee camps. That's right. College gets more costly as federal student loan rates are set to rise. That's right, students out there, college loans are set to rise. Billionaire Donald Trump, as I mentioned earlier, is telling us to prepare for, quote, financial ruin. And there's a bill in California would allow to confiscate guns based upon the accusation alone that someone was mentally unfit to have a gun. Isn't that interesting? So, here we are. It's summertime, it's August, it's a great time to be alive, to go on a vacation, to go to the beach, to get in touch with nature. As you can see behind me today, I've got some heavy machinery. Now, why do I have this in the background? Well, simple. What would be support manufacturing. I support infrastructure. I support the United States building its own, supplying its own, providing its own jobs and its own resources to its own people. A government that works in accordance with the Constitution. Now, I live just north of Seattle, about 40 miles, in a small town called Arlington. I remember in Seattle, along with other towns, even right here, there used to always be construction going on. When you go to Seattle, there would be the large cranes all over the city and high-rises being built everywhere. Now, you see repairs being done, you see here or there a building being built, but you don't see very much construction in general. This is not right. This is not good. Many skilled laborers right now are flipping burgers or even less. Not right. We have skilled labor right here in Western Washington. Seattle to Bellingham area that's qualified to work, that want to build this nation out of this crisis. Shovel jobs that start out at $17 an hour. Engineering jobs that start out at much higher. We have the potential, folks, to do what we have to do to get out of this crisis, to work together, to provide America and the future of humanity in America with a much safer, better road to go down. And when our government, including our Congress here, Rick Larson and others out there, when they do their job, guess what? It causes us to be collaborating and working with other nations such as Russia and China, not creating tensions that could cause to World War III against Russia and China. So our government has failed us, as typified through bailouts, what's coming next with the bail-in, this economy overall, capitulating and supporting that of Barack Obama and George W. Bush's worst laws for war and economic destruction, and the list goes on and on. Civil liberties are going down the drain. If you even question your authority, question your leaders, want to see alternative news, you may be labeled a conspiracy theorist or a terrorist even, domestic terrorist. Now that's scary. It used to be very American to question authority, very American to use your own head and to think. It used to be very American to seek the truth. Now, you better march the line, boy. You better say how high when they say jump. And that's very anti-American as far as I interpret it. So I'm here to provide you with the news, to help you, the American people, and the world, as there are world viewers watching this show in Russia, China, Canada, UK, and other places. 51 countries total, technically. I'm here for you, to provide you with the information. Now I got a video here that you get to see at the last here as a legal vet that has a firearm on him, is doing an open carry demonstration and has the firearm removed from him illegally and unconstitutionally. And you get to see this video as this vet records this. So I thank you for viewing. I thank you for telling your friends and family about this website. Please continue to do that. And as you hear the alarm in the background, which is not a sound effect, the battle cry and the alarms are going off, folks. Folks like me are coming on TV and on your internet stations, along with others, to give you a warning. There's the siren. You're being warned that you are about to lose your home. You're about to lose your future. You're about to lose your money. You're about to see things on the streets of America you never thought would or could happen to you, your family, and to America. And I'm here today to tell you, if you don't care about your neighbors, you don't care about other people's friends and family and parents and grandparents that are hurting financially, being cut financially of their unemployment, Medicaid, and other things that they desperately need. If you don't care for these people, then who's going to care for you when you lose your job? And that's a question I present to you today. Many of you are still financially okay, or you're not hurting enough to care yet. But when you start to hurt bad, you're going to be begging for a handout too, and you're going to want compassion. It's different when you're the one asking and begging for a handout versus the one being begged to give one. It's a very interesting situation. So I'm Kari Ilonummi. This is NoSpinNewsSource.com. I'm getting ready to go on a vacation here down to Portland, Oregon, to Seaside. Enjoy some days on the beach, relaxation, even do a little organizing and chatting politics with people downtown Portland. So if you're around, you might bump into me down at the Keller Fountain or other places down there at those wonderful food trucks and other places in Portland, Oregon, which I love to visit. And I'm going to see and go on tour with what would be Motley Crue and Alice Cooper for 2 shows in a row too. What the heck, might as well have a good time. So God bless you. Thank you so much. This is NoSpinNewsSource.com. I'm your host, Kari Ilonummi. We will be back next month with the August edition and maybe even some video footage of Alice Cooper for you too, live from the show. See you later, au revoir, ta-ta, and let's get America back up and working again and see machines like this doing more than just sitting in the background. Thank you, God bless, and see you soon.